I only needed shelter. Then the old workbench seemed to recognize my hands.
She was 18 and homeless. No room, no work. No one waiting, just a black garbage bag and $5 she had earned sweeping the foster home cellar. And with that $5, she bought an abandoned oak card catalog joiner's shop outside Grand Rapids, Kent County, Michigan. Erased from county maps in 1978. Half the north roof had fallen inward. Rain had swollen every door in its frame. The county condemned it on October 3rd, 2022, with demolition planned for the following spring. Yet beneath its ruined workroom stood a sealed oak compartment, untouched for generations, holding the last careful answer to a life she believed had no place. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Elara Voss had been fitting herself into narrow spaces her whole life without knowing it. She remembered childhood mostly by ceilings, water stains above a temporary bed in Holland, fluorescent panels in county offices where adults discussed her as though she were a parcel needing new postage. Her mother, Lillian, remained present in records longer than in rooms, signing forms with a narrow blue pen and promising each departure would be brief. The only adult who stayed long enough to become a measure was Amos Voss, Lillian's father, a blind woodworker who lived near Baldwin among red pines and sandy roads. He could not persuade the court to give him custody, but twice a month a county van left Elara at his gate on Saturday morning and returned Sunday before dark. Amos worked in a shed warmed by a cast-iron stove and the smell of quarter-sawn oak. Blindness had taken his sight at 43, but not the geography of his hands. He taught Elara to read grain with her thumb, hear when a plane iron was sharp, and fit a drawer by the hush it made in the case. Their ritual never changed. She swept the bench, he poured coffee into a chipped green mug, and together they milled one small drawer front until its ray flecks opened like pale feathers. Then Amos set 6 finished drawers in a row and mixed their places. Elara closed her eyes and identified each one by touch, testing the shoulders, runners and slight resistance of trapped air. A drawer should arrive without announcing itself, he told her. He meant more than furniture. Good work did not beg to be noticed. It made room, carried weight, and remained. Amos died during a February thaw when Elara was 14. By the time the county allowed her to visit the shed, his planes, gauges, card scrapers and old splitting fro had been sold with the property. The green mug lay broken beside the stove. She kept one curled oak shaving from beneath the bench and folded it into the lining of her winter coat. At Briar House, quiet was not kindness. Its manager, Nadine Kroll, wore grey dresses with pockets deep enough for keys, receipts, and the small permissions governing 12 girls. She checked mattresses with 2 fingers, counted bread slices after supper, and lowered her voice whenever she wished to make refusals sound reasonable. Nadine never struck anyone. She arranged the building so every closed door appeared to be the occupant's own fault. On November 14th, 2022, Elara turned 18. Snow ticked against the office window while Nadine placed a black garbage bag on the desk. Inside were 2 shirts, 1 pair of jeans, a library card, and the coat containing Amos's oak shaving. Lillian sat beneath a framed print of Lake Michigan, twisting a paper tissue until it became a white cord. Nadine pushed the bag toward Elara with 1 finger. "You are 18 now. This bed belongs elsewhere." 8 words. Elara counted them because Amos had taught her that exactness steadied the hands. She looked at her mother. Lillian's mouth opened, then closed. She did not stand. She did not touch the bag. When Elara lifted it, the plastic stretched around the heel of a shoe and sounded like a branch beginning to split. For 6 weeks, Elara moved south and east through western Michigan as winter tightened. In Muskegon, she slept beneath the concrete stair of a parking structure, waking whenever salt trucks scraped the street. She had $42 from cellar work, then $36 after bus fare to Holland. There she hid behind stacked pallets near a closed garden center until a guard found her and quietly pointed toward a church vestibule left unlocked until dawn. In Grand Haven, she spent $12 on socks, bread, and a cup of soup she made last through an afternoon. Wind off the lake found every seam in Amos's coat. By the time she reached Grand Rapids, $21 remained. She slept beneath a pedestrian bridge along the river, then in a laundromat chair until the attendant began mopping around her shoes. Each morning she washed in library restrooms, folded the garbage bag into a square, and searched bulletin boards for work that did not require an address. On December 27th, with $9.14 left, she entered the Ryerson Library to warm her hands over a radiator. A classified sheet had been pinned crookedly beside notices for piano lessons and snow removal. One line was typed in faded capital letters, County Ayokshan. Former Voss Oak Index Works. Structure and lot. Minimum bid $5. Cash. ASIS. Elara read it once, then laid 2 fingers over the surname. Below the notice, a grainy photograph showed a long barn with a collapsed roof and a forest of narrow windows. Through one broken pane she could make out the square shadows of hundreds of small drawers. She asked the librarian for a road atlas, copied the auction address onto the back of an expired bus schedule, and counted her money again. $5 for the bid, $4.14 for the road. Before the library closed, Elara tied the garbage bag beneath the flap of her coat and began walking toward the county building where the shop was due to be sold at 9 the next morning. By sunrise, she would learn whether $5 could buy a door no one else wanted to open. At 7:05, Elara boarded a county bus with wet cuffs and $4 folded inside her glove. The route carried her north through Grand Rapids beneath a sky the color of unfinished tin. She rode 11 miles before the driver stopped near Alpine Avenue and told her the remaining road lay beyond the winter schedule. From there she walked nearly 9 miles, following plowed shoulders, until the sidewalks ended and frozen fields opened on either side. Darkness caught her beside a hay barn with one loose door. She slept between square bales, wrapped in Amos's coat, while the temperature fell to 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Mice worked somewhere beneath the straw. Each time the wind pressed the siding inward, the entire barn sighed and released the dry summer smell still held inside the hay. She was walking again before dawn. The town of Plainfield appeared slowly, DeWitt's Hardware behind steamed windows, Ruthven Pharmacy with its red mortar sign, Bell's Family Cafe, North Star Feed and Grain, and a narrow funeral home called Mercer and Sons. Their roofs carried yesterday's snow in clean white bands. Delivery vans idled at curbs. Someone was sweeping salt across the cafe steps. The Kent County Property Office occupied a brick annex behind the township hall. Elara entered at 8:46, 13 minutes before the sale. Heat struck her face with the smell of wet wool, floor wax, and old paper. A woman behind the counter wore half-moon spectacles fastened to a silver chain. Her nameplate read MRS, Helen Ward, Deputy Clerk. She glanced first at Elara's garbage bag, then at the $5 bill placed carefully on the counter. "You are here for the Voss parcel." "Yes." "Ma'am?" Mrs. Ward opened a folder thick with inspection notices. "You understand the building has no electrical service?" "Yes." "Ma'am, you understand the well has not been tested since 1989? "Yes." "Ma'am, you understand the north roof may fail without warning?" "Yes." "Ma'am, and you understand the demolition order becomes active April 1st? "Yes." "Ma'am." The clerk studied her for several seconds. Behind Elara, a wall clock moved with a small mechanical click. No other bidder entered. Mrs. Ward turned the folder around. "Print your legal name here." Elara wrote Elara Mae Voss in the narrow box. The clerk's pen stopped above the witness line. "Voss," she said. Elara nodded. Mrs. Ward leaned closer, not with suspicion now, but recognition. "Did you know Amos Voss from Lake County? He was my grandfather." The clerk removed her spectacles and let them hang against her blouse. He made the catalogue drawers for the old township library. 240 of them. My father helped unload the cases when I was a girl. Elara looked toward the closed office door. The room seemed suddenly smaller. He never mentioned Plainfield. He may not have known this place survived, Mrs. Ward touched the folder's brittle edge. The original owner was Silas Voss, Amos's grandfather, according to the trade register. The shop closed before Amos was born, but the name remained on the tax roll until the county took possession. She opened a second envelope and drew out a photocopied ledger page. Voss Oak Index Works had been written across the top in faded ink. Beneath it stood columns for drawer cases, reading room cabinets, and architectural orders shipped to colleges across Michigan and Ohio. Your grandfather came here once, Mrs. Ward said, summer of 1976. He asked whether the workbench was still inside. The county would not let him enter because the floor had begun to fail. Did he say why he wanted it?
No.
He only stood outside a long while. The clock clicked again. 9 o'clock. Mrs. Ward accepted Elara's bill, pressed a brass seal into the deed, and struck the stamp twice to make the date clear. The sound carried through the annex like a small hammer falling on hardwood. She gave Elara the deed, one iron key, and precise directions. North on Alpine, right at 7 Mile Road, past the churchyard, then take the gravel lane after the abandoned cider press. The shop stands 300 yards beyond the walnut windbreak. Before Elara left, Mrs. Ward slid the $5 bill into the shallow drawer beneath her blotter instead of placing it with the county receipts. The auditor will ask about that, Elara said. I have another 5 in my purse. Outside, the snow had begun again. 7 Mile Road ran straight between dormant orchards and low houses set well back from the shoulder. At the churchyard, an elderly man in a canvas coat was clearing snow from a family stone. He raised his shovel when Elara asked about the old joiner's shop. Keep east until the road dips, he said. You will hear Wilson's dog before you see the lane. The dog proved to be a broad black animal with one white paw. It barked from behind a wire fence while its owner, Mrs. Wilson, stood on her porch holding a blue enamel bowl. She had silver hair braided down the back of her coat. That place has been empty longer than you have been alive, she called. I bought it this morning. Mrs. Wilson looked at the garbage bag, the deed tube beneath Elara's arm, and the iron key in her hand. Then she whistled once, and the dog sat. You had better get there before dark. Beyond the Wilson property, 2 rows of black walnut trees marked the entrance to a lane buried under 6 inches of snow. Their bare limbs met overhead. Fallen husks lay frozen beneath them, dark as burned leather. The shop appeared at the far end. It was larger than the auction photograph suggested, nearly 80 feet long and 30 wide, framed in white oak and sheathed with weathered pine boards. The north roof sagged around a black opening broad enough to admit snow. A square brick chimney leaned slightly west. Above the main doors, a painted sign remained beneath the lichen. Voss Oak Index Works. Library cases. Drawers fitted by hand. Elara stood at the threshold until her breathing quieted. The iron key resisted twice before the swollen lock turned. When she pulled, the door opened only 4 inches. She put her shoulder against it, felt old wood drag across warped flooring, and entered sideways. Cold oak dust touched her tongue. The front room smelled of mouse nests, wet plaster, and the dry sweetness of timber sealed from sunlight. Hundreds of small drawers lined the walls from knee-height to the rafters, their brass pulls dulled green at the edges. Snowlight passed through cracked panes and lay across them in pale rectangles. Her boots disturbed shavings so old they broke without sound. In the back room, the roof opening had filled one corner with snow. A workbench stood beneath a canvas cover stiff with frost. Nearby rested a treadle lathe, 2 empty tool chests, and a cast-iron stove whose door hung from one hinge. When Elara touched the bench, cold travelled through her fingertips into her wrist. The oak surface bore shallow grooves left by generations of clamps and plane irons. She heard water ticking into a metal pan somewhere beyond the wall. She heard wind moving through the chimney. Beneath both sounds was another, softer one, the minute settling of fitted drawers as the building cooled. By evening, she had cleared a place in the front room with a broken broom. She spread her coat beneath her, used the folded garbage bag as a barrier against the floor, and ate the last heel of bread from her pocket. It tasted faintly of the hay barn. The darkness inside the shop was complete. Yet when she reached toward the nearest card drawer and pulled its brass handle, it moved outward without scraping. It arrived silently. Elara left the drawer open beside her and slept with one hand resting inside it. A massive oak cabinet is built solely to organize thousands of tiny, chaotic ideas so that anyone looking for answers can easily find exactly where they belong. Elara woke before light and began by testing what could still be trusted. The hand pump behind the shop produced rust-coloured water for 12 strokes, then cleared enough to show the white bottom of a tin cup. She boiled it before drinking. The outhouse leaned toward a stand of sumac but remained sound beneath her weight. By the third day she knew which floorboards complained, which merely whispered, and which dark plank near the back room concealed a rotten joist. At DeWitt's Hardware, warmth rose from iron floor grates and carried the smells of kerosene, rope, and seed potatoes. The owner, Martin DeWitt, had a white crescent scar crossing his left thumb. He listened while Elara described the chimney, the damaged stove hinge, and the roof opening. "How much money have you got?" 14 cents. He looked past her toward the frosted window. "That is not enough for a box of matches." "I know." Martin opened a ruled account book and wrote her name beneath farm, household, and trade. He allowed her a $30 credit line, then placed a stained manual on the counter. "My father learned repairs from that book. Bring it back before the pages turn to dust." She bought a chimney brush for $6.75, 30 feet of rope for $3.20, stove cement for $2.10, a wire hand brush for 90 cents, and a small sack of rock salt for 45 cents. Martin added matches without writing them down. The chimney took most of the next day. Elara tied the round brush to the rope, weighted the lower end with a rusted sash weight, and climbed through the collapsed section of roof where 2 rafters still held. Snow had crusted over the shingles. She moved on her knees, distributing her weight as Amos had taught her when crossing uncertain boards. At the chimney crown, she lowered the brush until it stopped against a hard shelf of creosote. She pulled it up 6 inches, let it drop, and repeated the motion until black flakes rattled into the stove below. Twice the rope snagged where the flue narrowed. Each time she marked the depth with a knot, climbed down, and worked upward with the wire brush taped to a broom handle. The soot came loose in brittle curls, some glossy as tar, some soft enough to stain her sleeves through the cloth. She filled half a grain sack. 6 hours passed before the brush travelled from crown to firebox without resistance. She reset the stove door on a bent hinge pin, pressed cement into 2 hairline seams, and waited until morning before lighting anything larger than paper. Her first fire began with oak shavings gathered beneath the workbench. The draft pulled weakly, then strengthened. Smoke rose inside the flue instead of entering the room. Elara held a strip of newspaper near the stove collar and watched it bend steadily toward the heat. She boiled water and cooked oatmeal in a dented saucepan Martin had found beneath his counter. It contained only oats, salt, and half an apple Mrs. Wilson had left on the lane post. Elara ate sitting on an overturned drawer case while warmth reached the front wall 1 narrow board at a time. Afterward, she began the workroom inventory. She chose only objects that still had purpose, a cast-iron shooting board with its fence worn smooth, a treadle lathe whose leather belt had hardened but not split, 3 wooden smoothing planes marked SV, a brass draw depth gauge divided into 30 seconds, a rack of narrow moulding irons, 2 cam clamps made from applewood, a heavy splitting froe with a dark oak handle, and the master workbench beneath the frozen canvas. The bench was nearly 12 feet long, with twin screw vises and 4 square legs thick enough to support a bridge. Its top had been scrubbed hollow near the front edge. A line of tiny holes crossed one corner where someone had once set brass pins in measured sequence. Elara removed the canvas and swept the surface with the broken broom. One leg sounded different. She discovered it by accident while tapping dried mud from the bench feet with the handle of a screwdriver. 3 legs answered with a dense, blunt knock. The rear left leg gave back a lower note, not hollow exactly, but delayed. She tapped it again. Then she pressed her shoulder against the bench. It did not shift. The strange leg carried weight like the others. Yet when she wrapped both hands around it and lifted, that corner felt lighter than oak of that thickness should have felt. A circular cedar disc had been fitted into the underside. It was nearly invisible beneath soot and flour-fine dust. The grain ran contrary to the oak around it. Amos had taught her that repairs tried to disappear, while doors left one honest clue. Elara brought the lantern close. 2 shallow holes marked the disc's edge. She inserted the points of a bent pair of dividers and turned slowly. The cedar resisted through half a rotation, then released with the dry breath of threads unused for decades. Inside the leg was a narrow cavity lined with waxed cloth. She did not reach into it at once. She cleaned the floor beneath the bench, carried the lantern closer, and spread the canvas flat as a work surface. Then she slid 2 fingers into the opening and drew out the first package. It was wrapped in oiled linen and tied with linen thread. Inside lay 3 small heirloom tools, a rosewood marking knife, a brass dovetail gauge, and a thumb plane no longer than her palm. Each carried the same stamped symbol, and open drawer beneath a 7-pointed star. The second package held slips of quarter-sawn oak, each planed to an exact 1/8 of an inch and labelled by year. 1894, 1907, 1919, 1936. The ray flecks shifted under the lantern when she tilted them. A third bundle contained handwritten notes on drawer runners, seasonal wood movement, shellac mixtures, and the proper clearance for catalogue cases intended for heated libraries. Beneath those papers was a single index card. On it, in dark brown ink, someone had written, "When you can make one drawer move without sound, you are safe to open what remains." Elara set the card beside the tools. The final object in the cavity was a tin document box wrapped twice in wool. Its lid had no lock. She lifted it with both hands and felt weight move inside with the measured slide of metal. She opened the box 1 hinge width at a time. The upper tray held coins arranged in cloth rolls. Beneath them lay folded bank certificates, a tarnished military medal, and a sealed envelope addressed in a hand she recognized before she allowed herself to name it. She placed the envelope face down. Then she counted. There were Liberty Head double eagles, Indian head eagles, Morgan silver dollars, and smaller Barber $half packed around the edges to prevent movement. She counted each roll twice, wrote the subtotals with a carpenter's pencil, then repeated the entire count after moving the coins into separate rows. The bank certificates remained crisp beneath their waxed paper, together with the coins. They amounted to $31,000. The medal was a World War I Victory Medal dated 1919, its faded ribbon carrying a bronze battle clasp. The name engraved along the rim was Daniel Silas Voss. Elara held it only by the edges. The sealed letter bore her grandfather's full name in the lower corner, Amos Edwin Voss. The handwriting had the same deliberate slope as the labels he once placed beneath her practice drawers. Outside, daylight disappeared without her noticing. She returned the money to the tin box, wrapped the tools, and set the unopened letter on the bench. She could clean a chimney, test a floor, and count money because each task had an order. The letter offered no such protection. She carried the medal outside instead, beyond the walnut trees. Snowmelt moved beneath a skin of ice in the drainage creek. Elara stood on the bank until the last grey light left the water. The medal rested in her closed palm, warming slowly, while behind her the shop windows held the first steady fire the building had known in years. A massive oak cabinet is built solely to organize thousands of tiny, chaotic ideas so that anyone looking for answers can easily find exactly where they belong. At first light, Elara carried the envelope to the front room and set it beside the open card drawer where she had slept. The paper had yellowed at the folds. Amos's handwriting crossed the front in the same measured slope he had used on drawer labels, every letter spaced as though it needed room to move. She warmed her hands around a tin cup before breaking the seal with a rosewood marking knife. My dear one, whoever you are, if you're reading this, then you have found the bench leg, opened it carefully, and chosen not to break what could be understood. That is enough for me to trust you. My name is Amos Edwin Voss. In March of 2008, Dr. Helen Park at Butterworth Hospital in Grand Rapids told me that the cancer in my pancreas had already reached my liver. She was honest. I had months, perhaps less, and my hands would weaken before the rest of me did. I came here once in 1976 and was refused entry. I returned in secret 32 years later, after the county stopped checking the locks. I brought back what little remained of our family trade. Silas Voss opened this shop in 1888 after learning cabinet work in Cincinnati. His daughter, Clara Voss, born in 1878, ran the drawer-fitting room after Silas lost 2 fingers. Clara's son, Daniel, carried the business through the lean years until he died in France in 1918 during the Meuse-Argonne fighting. Daniel's younger brother, Edwin, closed the trade on October 12, 1941, in Grand Rapids. Edwin taught my father, Walter, in a basement shop in Baldwin. Walter taught me I had hoped to teach my daughter Lillian, but she wanted distance from every room that carried the Voss name. The shop has been silent for more than 30 years. Silence does not mean the work is dead. Quarter-sawn oak should enter the fitting room at 6 to 8% moisture. For small drawer sides, allow 1/32 of an inch total clearance in winter and half that in August. Mix the first shellac coat 1 part flakes to 4 parts alcohol. Then wait 12 hours before rubbing it with worn 320 grit paper. When fitting runners, make 3 passes with the shoulder plane, then stop and test. The 4th pass is often the one that ruins the drawer. The money was saved from contracts, wages never drawn, and coins Daniel sent home before France. Use it only to make shelter, restore tools, and continue honest work. An inheritance is not what someone leaves in your hands. It is the work they believed your hands might still be capable of doing. Behind the shop, beyond the walnut row, find the stone marked with the open drawer and 7-pointed star. Light the small brass lamp there once. It belonged to Clara. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You're welcome here. Amos Edwin Voss, September 18th. 208. Elara read the letter twice. The second time, she placed 1 finger beneath each line as she had when Amos first taught her to follow a ruler. When she finished, she folded the paper along its original creases, pressing each one flat with the side of her thumb. She returned it to the envelope without sealing it. Outside, the morning had cleared cold and blue. She walked through the back door, crossed the drifted yard, and passed between the walnut trees. Beyond them, the ground sloped toward the creek. Snow had settled unevenly over stones and roots, but one low marker remained bare along its upper edge. Elara knelt and brushed it clean with her sleeve. The stone was field granite, no higher than a loaf of bread. Carved into its face was the same mark stamped on the heirloom tools, an open drawer beneath a 7-pointed star. Below it, weather had softened a single name, Clara. A shallow niche had been cut into the back of the marker. Inside stood a brass oil lamp no taller than Elara's hand. Its wick had dried to a black thread, but a few drops of oil remained sealed in a small glass vial beside it. She carried both into the shop, cleaned the burner with a strip of linen, and trimmed the wick square. The old brass took warmth from her fingers. When she struck a match, the flame rose narrow and uncertain, then steadied beneath the glass chimney. Elara placed the lamp beside Amos's letter. For the first time, she understood how many hands had carried her farther than they knew. The church custodian in Holland had left the vestibule unlocked on the coldest nights. The laundromat attendant in Grand Rapids had mopped slowly enough to give her another hour indoors. Mrs. Ward had kept the $5 bill and sent her toward the lane with a deed. Martin DeWitt had opened a credit ledger when she possessed 14 cents. Mrs. Wilson had left half an apple where pride would not have to accept it directly. None of them had rescued her. Each had simply moved one obstacle aside. Perhaps someone once did that for you. Perhaps it was a meal left without explanation, a ride offered in bad weather, or a door held open when you had nowhere else to stand. What small kindness do you still remember because it arrived at the exact moment you needed it? That night, Elara returned the money to the tin box and placed it beneath the bench. She arranged the marking knife, dovetail gauge, thumb plane, medal, and folded letter beside her bed on the floor. The brass lamp burned until the oil was nearly gone. Before sleeping, she closed the nearest card drawer with one careful push. It disappeared into the cabinet without a sound. The first measurable snow came on December 2. 7 inches laid across the broken roof before noon. Elara read the roofing chapter in Martin's manual 3 times beside the stove, tracing each diagram with a blunt pencil. The shop measured 80 feet by 30, but only the northern slope needed immediate work. 32 feet long, 16 feet from ridge to eave. She calculated 12 squares of cedar shingles, 3 rolls of felt, and 28 pounds of galvanized nails, then checked the figures again before taking them to DeWitt's. Martin read the page without comment. From beneath the counter, she produced a roofing hatchet with a leather-wrapped handle. My brother used this until his knees failed. Elara accepted it with both hands. The skilled help arrived the next morning. Walter Boone, a retired roofer with a white mustache stained by coffee, climbed the ladder, examined the sagging line, and refused payment before she offered it. You will need the money later. They worked for 11 days. Walter showed her how to sister a sound rafter beside one split near the chimney, fastening the new timber with carriage bolts rather than trusting the old grain. They snapped chalk lines across the felt, so every shingle course climbed straight despite the building beneath it leaning in 3 directions. Walter taught her to set each nail with 3 strokes, 1 to start, 1 to seat, 1 to finish. On the 4th morning, she touched a nail head with the edge of his glove. That nail's proud, Elara raised the hatchet. Pull it. By December 15th, the north roof held a clean dark plane against the snow. That evening, rain replaced the cold. Elara stood beneath the repaired rafters with a lantern and listened for drops. None came. The chimney began shedding brick after New Year's Day. Its western face showed spalling where trapped water had frozen and lifted thin red shells from the surface. Mortar turned to powder beneath Elara's thumb. She removed every loose joint with a narrow plugging chisel, brushing the cavities until no grit remained. Martin helped her mix hydraulic lime and sand at 1:3. Then add fireclay in equal measure with lime for the joints nearest the flue. The mixture looked coarse and weak compared with modern cement, but Walter warned that hard mortar would force old brick to break around it. For 3 weeks, Elara worked in temperatures that rarely climbed above the middle 20s. She warmed bricks beside the stove before carrying them outside and kept the mortar covered with damp burlap so it would cure slowly. Her bare hands went numb every 15 minutes. Gloves were too clumsy for the narrow joints, so she worked until her fingers lost precision, then held them near the stove without touching the iron. When feeling returned, it arrived first as pain beneath the nails. She rebuilt the upper 6 courses, reset the cap, and sealed the flashing beneath the shingles with lead folded into the joints rather than smeared across them. On January 29th, Walter stood inside while Elara lit a test fire. Smoke rose in a straight grey column. The draft strengthened as the flue warmed, drawing the flame inward with a low, steady sound. Walter removed his cap and looked up. Clean as a church bell, beneath the soot and mouse stains. The front room floor was white pine fastened with hand-cut rosehead nails. Elara drove each raised nail below the surface with a narrow punch before renting Martin's random orbit sander for $14 a day. The machine shook her shoulders numb, but it spared the old boards from the ridges a belt sander might leave. She made 3 passes. 80 grit removed the blackened finish. 120 softened the scratches. 220 quieted the grain until the boards felt like worn cloth beneath her palm. Dust entered every pocket and gathered in her hair. Each evening, she vacuumed the seams with Martin's borrowed shop cleaner, then wiped the room with linen dampened in mineral spirits. She applied 3 thin coats of tung oil, waiting until each one stopped shining before rubbing away the excess. After the final coat, she barred the doors and allowed a 48-hour cure. The boards changed from dull grey to dark honey, then deepened toward mahogany where generations of boots had compressed the grain. One morning, Elara woke unable to lift the sander. She carried a cup to the marsh instead. A great blue heron stood among the reeds, motionless except for one slow turn of its head. For 2 hours she watched it wait beside the open water. She did no work that day. The following morning, she returned before sunrise and completed the last section beneath the catalogue wall. 8 windows faced the road and marsh. 3 had no glass at all. 4 retained cracked panes held together by old putty and winter frost. The 8th contained one wavering original pane dated 1788 in a faint corner scratch, salvaged from an earlier house and reused when the shop was built. Elara left it untouched. She removed the broken glass from the other 7 openings and softened the surviving putty with careful heat from a small electric plate Martin loaned her. Each replacement pane rested on glazing points spaced no farther than 8 inches apart. She rolled DAP 33 putty between her palms until it became pliable, pressed it into the rabbet with her thumb, then drew the knife in one continuous stroke so the bevel shed water cleanly. 4 sash cords had rotted through. Elara threaded 1/4-inch cotton line over the pulleys and tied each counterweight with a figure-8 knot, pulling it tight against the iron eye. The restored sash rose without jerking and remained wherever she left it. She worked on the final window during the last week of February. Outside, sunlight reached through the walnut row for the first time that winter. As Elara pressed the last length of putty beneath the lower pane, a chickadee landed on a branch beyond the glass. It tilted its black-capped head toward the room, tapped the bark once, and remained while she cleaned the knife. When she raised the finished sash, cold air entered without rain. She left it open for several minutes. The walls near the chimney failed first. Their original horsehair plaster had been pressed over hand-split oak lath, each strip carrying the rough marks of a froe. Elara's first patch cracked overnight. The second sagged before setting. The third held until the stove warmed, then opened along the edge like dry earth. Martin brought her an old feed bag containing horsehair saved by his father. She mixed it into lime plaster until the fibres crossed the trowel instead of gathering in knots. The scratch coat went on first. pressed firmly between the laths and scored with horizontal lines. She followed with a 3/8-inch brown coat, elvelled but not polished, then kept it damp beneath linen for a 72-hour cure. The finished coat measured barely 1/8 of an inch. At dusk, she passed her palm across the repaired wall. Small waves remained where old plaster met new. These patches will hold another 100 years. She did not say it as a promise. She said it as a standard. Doris Bell, who owned the cafe, began leaving paper bags on the doorstep each Thursday. She wore her red hair in a net and marked every bag with the date in green pencil. Inside were biscuit ends, soup in a sealed jar, and once a square of apple cake wrapped in waxed paper. When Elara tried to pay, Doris closed Elara's fingers around the coins. In candles, when the shop reopens, she walked away before Elara could answer. Caleb Ward arrived one Saturday on a blue Schwinn bicycle with a splitting maul balanced across the handlebars. He was 16, tall enough to appear folded when he dismounted, and had a pale birthmark running beneath his right ear. He pointed toward the stack of walnut rounds beside the lane. "I can split those. I cannot pay you," my mother said. "About your grandfather." He worked until noon, setting each round upright and striking with the patience of someone who preferred wood to conversation. Before leaving, she stacked the split pieces beneath the repaired eave so rain could not reach them. Reverend Boyd passed the shop every morning at 7:20. He was a narrow man with mud always dried along the hems of his trousers. Some days he carried church mail, other days he carried nothing. He never entered without invitation. He tipped his hat through the restored window and offered the same four-word prayer: "Keep her work honest." By March, Elara had begun lifting one hand from the bench to return the gesture. She postponed the cellar until February 11th. The entrance lay beneath a trapdoor behind the master bench. 7 granite steps descended to a 12 by 15-foot room floored with uneven fieldstone. Moisture darkened the lower walls, but the joists above remained sound. At the center of the floor rested a dressed granite slab, too regular to belong among the rough stones. The open drawer mark had been carved into one corner. Elara brushed away the dirt, tested the edges, and left it in place. She had learned that not every sealed thing required immediate opening. While clearing leaves from the stairs, her scraper struck wood beneath the 3rd step. A small oak box had been wedged behind the riser. It contained a brass key whose bow formed the shape of an open drawer beneath a star and a tintype wrapped in black cloth. The photograph showed a young woman standing outside the shop in the summer of 1903. She held a narrow shoulder plane against her apron. Her hair was lighter than Elara's, but the set of the mouth, the close-set eyes, and the slight bend in the left thumb might have belonged to the same person. On the back, written with a steel nib, were the words, "Clara Voss, daughter of Silas, age 25, summer of 1903. Elara carried the key upstairs and set it on the mantel beside the brass lamp. She tried it in the tool chests, the catalogue locks, the desk, and the tin box. It fit none of them. There it remained, brightening slowly whenever the fire was lit, waiting for a lock she had not yet recognized. Snow withdrew from the lane in grey ridges. The creak grew loud enough to hear from the front room, and pale walnut catkins appeared along the branches where the chickadee had waited. Elara repaired the workbench vise, sharpened Amos's marking knife, and sorted the old oak slips by grain. She did not begin a full catalogue cabinet that spring. Instead, she chose one Barber $half from the tin box and exchanged it for modern currency through a coin dealer Martin trusted. With part of the proceeds, she bought quarter sawn oak, shellac flakes, and 2 narrow lengths of hard maple for runners. She practiced on small samples. One drawer bound in damp weather. Another rattled when the stove cooled. She planned a third too far and burned it without ceremony. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, on December 7th, 224, Elara completed her first full card catalogue case. It stood waist high and held 36 drawers arranged in 6 exact rows. She had milled every side from quarter-sawn oak, cut each half-blind dovetail by hand, and fitted hard maple runners with 1/32 of an inch total winter clearance. The brass pulls came from a demolished school library in Muskegon. She tested the drawers at dawn, when the shop was coldest. 35 moved cleanly. The final one resisted halfway. Elara removed it, passed the shoulder plane over the runner twice, then stopped before the third pass. When she returned the drawer to its opening, it travelled inward on a cushion of trapped air and settled without announcing itself. She placed Amos's green mug, paired with a narrow brass staple, on top of the case. The shop around it had become useful again. The roof held an even line beneath snow. White pine floors reflected the brass lamp in dark amber bands. The restored windows no longer trembled during north wind, and the catalogue walls had been cleaned without removing the dents left by librarians, carpenters, and freight handlers. Elara kept the old bench scars uncovered. The brass key found its lock that same month. A freezing rain had split a dead limb from the largest walnut tree beside the lane, when Caleb helped cut it away. His saw exposed a small rectangular plate set into the trunk, hidden beneath a growth of bark. The plate bore no lettering, only 7 shallow points around a recessed keyhole. Elara brought the key from the mantel. It turned once. Behind the plate was a narrow copper-lined chamber built into an old hollow and sealed from rain. Inside lay a folded 48-star American flag, dry despite the decades, and a note written by Elara Voss on October 4th, 1918. Daniel had already been reported missing in France. Clara wrote that he had carried one of the shop's brass drawer pulls in his uniform pocket, because he believed a man should keep one small piece of home near his hand. She did not know whether he would return. The flag had flown above the shop on the day his unit departed, and she could not bear to place it in a public cabinet where strangers might unfold it carelessly. If Daniel came home, she wrote, she would decide what should be done with it. If he did not, the next worker in the family could choose. Elara refolded the flag along its established lines. She did not display it in the front window. She placed it in a shallow oak case with Daniel's medal, and covered the case with glass cut from one of the damaged panes she had saved. On September 26, 2025, the anniversary of the opening of the Meuse-Argonne offensive, she carried the case to Woodlawn Cemetery in Grand Rapids. Reverend Boyd read Daniel's name aloud beside the Veterans Memorial. Mrs. Ward stood behind him holding her hat against the wind. There was no band and no announcement. Elara laid a single brass drawer pull beneath the engraved names, waited until the others had gone, and brought the medal home before rain reached the city. Of the money in the bench leg, she used 4 coins. 1 paid for the roof materials. 1 bought a used jointer from a retiring cabinet maker in Rockford. 1 funded the electrical line and a safe stove installation. The 4th purchased enough kiln-dried oak for the 36-drawer case and the orders that followed. She left the bank certificates and all remaining coins inside the tin box. Around them, she wrapped fresh waxed cloth and added a card in her own handwriting. For the next one. Count twice. Use this little. Leave more. The box returned to the workbench leg. She threaded the cedar disc into place and stopped when the grain aligned. The shop reopened without a sign in the newspaper. Doris pinned 1 index card to the corkboard beside the cafe register. Voss Oak Index Works, small drawers, cases, and repairs. Inquire by mail. The first order came from a retired school teacher who wanted 12 drawers for seed packets. The second came from a church archivist. By the following spring, more than 40 names filled a mailing list stored in one of the original catalogue drawers. Elara accepted only enough work to finish carefully. Some months she made 2 cases. Some months she made none. Caleb returned after trade school with broader shoulders and the same pale mark beneath his ear. He carried a hand-carved oak sign wrapped in a moving blanket. The original board above the doors had been cleaned but never repainted. It still read Voss Oak Index Works in worn black letters. Caleb's new piece was smaller, shaped to fit beneath it. He leaned it against the bench and removed the blanket. And daughters. Elara ran her thumb across the carved ampersand. There are no daughters, she said. Not yet, Caleb replied. He did not mean children alone. Doris understood it when she brought candles. Mrs. Ward understood it when she mailed copies of old trade records. The word made room for apprentices, nieces, strangers, and anyone who arrived carrying more care than inheritance. They mounted the sign beneath the old one before sunset. That winter, Elara began a letter. She used cream paper, Amos's marking knife to open the folds cleanly, and the restored card drawer as a writing surface. Her first line matched the one she had once been afraid to read. My dear one, whoever you are. She described the roof, the chimney, the correct humidity for fitting small drawers, and the day a heron had taught her that no work was sometimes the work required. She recorded Martin's credit, Doris's paper bags, Caleb's maul, and Reverend Boyd's 4 words. She did not explain what the shop had saved her from. The reader would see enough in the objects she had preserved. Near the end, she wrote one sentence by itself. A massive oak cabinet is built solely to organize thousands of tiny, chaotic ideas so that anyone looking for answers can easily find exactly where they belong. She signed the letter, dated it, and placed it beneath the remaining money. Outside, evening snow gathered on the walnut limbs. Elara closed the workroom shutters, banked the stove, and passed her hand across the first cabinet before turning down the lamp. The antique oak card catalogue joiner's shop waits. It has always waited. At the county annex, Mrs. Ward retired the following spring. On her final afternoon, she emptied the shallow drawer beneath her blotter and found the creased $5 bill from Elara's purchase. She wrote the parcel number across one corner, returned it to the drawer, and locked the desk. Some payments were not meant to be spent.